The meeting room inside the Galactic Accord's great station, Saranath Prime, was quiet. The chairs were made of a smooth silver material that hummed softly when you sat in them. The walls glowed with a pale blue light. Everything about the room was calm and careful, just like the beings who sat inside it. Ambassador Viel of the Thalori leaned back in his chair. His long fingers tapped slowly on the table. His skin, like all Thalori skin, shifted color as he thought. Right now, it was a soft green, the color of calm thinking. Around him sat representatives from 16 other species. Some had 4 arms, some had no arms at all. One had 3 heads, though only 2 of them were paying attention. The topic was serious, very serious. For 30 years, the Galactic Accord and the Keth Dominion had been circling each other like 2 animals who were too tired to fight but too proud to walk away. Trade routes had been blocked. Ships had been turned back at borders. Words had been exchanged, sharp, ugly words. Nobody had fired a weapon yet, but everyone felt that the day was getting closer. And so someone, finally, had suggested a peace summit. The Keth had agreed. The Accord had agreed. Now they needed a location, a schedule, and most importantly, a symbol. Something that said, this is serious, this is real, and we both mean it this time. Junior Attaché Seal, a small blue creature with round silver eyes, raised one of his 4 hands. What about a neutral observer, he said. A third party, someone who has no stake in this conflict. Their presence would show good faith from both sides. Viel's skin flickered to a thoughtful yellow. That is a smart idea, Seal. But who? Every major species in this region has some history with either the Accord or the Keth. Seal pulled up a list on his data pad. He scrolled past dozens of species. Too involved, too aggressive, too likely to cause problems. Then his silver eyes stopped on one name near the bottom of the list. Humans, he said. A few heads around the table turned. One of the 3-headed delegates made a confused noise with 2 of its mouths. Humans, Vale repeated. The ones from the small blue planet? The third rock from that average yellow star? Yes, said Seal. They have been in space for only a short time. They have no real power yet. No large fleets, no old grudges with anyone. They are... He paused, and searching for the right words. Simple, quiet, well-meaning. They would make perfect observers. They would sit in the gallery, look impressed, and not cause any problems. Viel thought about this. His skin went yellow, then orange, then settled back on green. Send them an invitation, he said, but keep it polite and simple. We do not want to confuse them. On Earth, in a tall, gray building in the middle of a busy city, a small team of humans read the invitation 3 times to make sure they understood it. Director Elena Vasquez sat at the head of the table. She was a compact woman in her late 40s with short, dark hair and the kind of face that had seen too many long meetings and not enough sleep. She read the invitation again, then set it down. They want us to come as observers, she said. Yes, said her aide, a young man named Chen, who was very good at reading complicated documents. Neutral observers. We are not expected to speak, vote, or participate. We just watch. So they invited us because they think we are harmless, said Vasquez. Chen hesitated. They used the word uncomplicated. Vasquez smiled slowly. Fine, we'll go. She looked around the table. Put together a delegation. I want diplomats, obviously. I want Dr. Nair from the Xenobiology department. This is a once-in-a-lifetime chance for her. And I want 2 engineers. These stations like that always have something that needs fixing. Someone at the far end of the table raised their hand. It was Colonel Bright from the Defense Department. Security? He asked. 4 soldiers, said Vasquez. Standard escort, nothing heavy. Colonel Bright nodded and wrote something down. To him, nothing heavy still meant full body armor, standard-issue rifles, and Sergeant Marcus Okoye, the most unreadable, most quietly intimidating soldier in the entire United Earth military. Okoye had once stood completely still for 6 hours during a border patrol in a sandstorm and later described it as relaxing. The delegation was assembled in 2 days, 12 humans in total. They packed their bags, loaded the UES Resolute, and prepared to leave. The Resolute was not a beautiful ship. It was boxy and thick, built for function rather than elegance. Its hull was dark gray with yellow safety markings along the sides. It had no curves, no graceful lines, no flowing design. That one engineer had once described it as a warehouse that someone bolted rockets to. The humans thought it was perfectly fine. They departed on a Tuesday morning. Back on Serenith Prime, the other delegations were arriving one by one in their long, elegant ships. The Keth vessels were deep red with curved silver wings. The Sorvathi ship was almost transparent, like a soap bubble drifting through space. The Thalori cruiser was pale gold, every panel carved with ancient patterns. A SEAL stood at the docking bay window and watched them come in. He was making small notes on his data pad. Day 1. All going well. The mood is tense but manageable. The Keth delegation has requested separate dining arrangements, which is expected. The Sorvati High Priest has asked that his meditation room be kept at exactly 40 degrees and completely dark. Noted. He was feeling cautiously hopeful. Then his communicator beeped. He looked down at it. It was a message from the outer sensor array. A ship had been detected approaching the station. It was not on the schedule. It was moving very fast. It was blocky. It had yellow markings. SEAL blinked. He did the math in his head. The invitation had been sent 3 days ago. The journey from Earth to Serenath Prime, using standard travel routes and average ship speed, took just under 2 weeks. He stared at the sensor reading again. Then he walked very quickly to Ambassador Vale's chamber and knocked on the door. "The humans are here," SEAL said when the door opened. Vale looked at him without expression. "They cannot be here. We sent the invitation 3 days ago. The journey takes 2 weeks." "I know," said SEAL. His chromatophores, the small color-changing patches along his neck, had gone completely pale. "They went faster." Vael was quiet for a moment. Then he said very carefully, "How much faster?" SEAL looked at his datapad. "About 5 times faster." Another silence. Vael straightened his robes. "Send someone to meet them at the docking bay," he said, "and tell them to smile, whatever that looks like in human terms." SEAL nodded and went to make the call. Outside the wide station window, the gray boxy ship was already slowing down and moving into its docking position, yellow markings bright under the station lights. It did not look elegant. It did not look ceremonial. And it looked, SEAL thought, like something that had been built to survive things other ships were not meant to survive. He made a small note on his data pad. Day 1. The humans have arrived early, reassessing. The docking bay of Serenath Prime was a large, clean space with high ceilings and soft white lighting. The floor was polished to a mirror shine. Banners from every member species of the Galactic Accord hung along the walls in careful order. And a small welcome committee stood near the docking door. 3 Thalori attendants in pale robes, 1 protocol officer, and SEAL, who had put on his best formal sash and was gripping his datapad a little too tightly. They had prepared a short, welcome speech. They had prepared a traditional greeting gesture. They had prepared small, ceremonial gifts, tiny glass flowers filled with colored gas, 1 for each member of the human delegation. What they had not prepared for was the sound. The Resolute docked with a grinding, scraping clunk that rang through the entire bay like a hammer hitting an iron bell. Several of the glass flowers rattled on their tray. One of the Thalori attendants grabbed the wall. The protocol officer made a very small noise that she later denied making. Seal wrote on his data pad, "Ship docked. Structural integrity of bay confirmed." Sound was loud. Then the docking door opened. Director Elena Vasquez stepped out first. She was wearing a neat, dark suit, and her small flag pin on her lapel, her posture straight and easy. She looked around the bay with quick, bright eyes, taking it all in, the banners, the light, the alien welcome committee standing very still in front of her, and she smiled. It was a big smile, a genuine one, full of warmth and real excitement. All of her teeth showed. The Thalori interpreter standing just behind Seal sucked in a sharp breath and typed rapidly on his translation device. And the note he sent to the diplomatic log later read, "The lead human immediately displayed full dental exposure and extended a grasping forelimb. Threat assessment, ambiguous. Likely dominance display, proceeding with caution." Vasquez walked straight up to Seal and stuck out her hand. Seal looked at the hand. He looked at her face. He looked at the hand again. In Thalori culture, extending a limb toward a stranger's body was something you did right before a formal challenge. He knew, intellectually from the briefing documents, that humans did this as a greeting. He knew this. He had read it 3 times. He still had to remind himself not to step back. He reached out and shook her hand. Her grip was firm and brief. She was already moving on, waving the rest of her delegation out of the ship, calling names, organizing people with quick, easy authority. The 4 soldiers came out together. Sergeant Marcus Okoye led them. He was a tall man, wide-shouldered, and with a calm face that gave away nothing at all. He was wearing full body armor, dark gray plates over his chest, arms, and legs, helmet clipped to his belt, boots heavy on the polished floor. His 3 soldiers were dressed the same way. They moved quietly. They looked at everything and showed no reaction to any of it. The Keth observers who had gathered at the far edge of the bay, curious, suspicious, went very still when the soldiers walked out. In Keth tradition, you did not wear armor to a diplomatic meeting unless you were expecting the diplomacy to fail. You especially did not bring 4 armored fighters who moved like they were already scanning the room for exits. One Keth observer leaned close to another and whispered, "They brought a war unit." The other one whispered back, "A small one." The first one said, "That might be worse." Doctor. Priya Nair came out of the ship with a bag over each shoulder and a look on her face like someone who had just been handed the best gift of their life. She was a xenobiologist. She studied alien life, and now, for the first time, she was standing in a room full of it. She turned slowly in a circle, looking at everything. The Thalori attendants with their color-shifting skin, the Keth observers with their hard gray exoskeletons and their large compound eyes. Seal is who had 4 arms and silver eyes and a formal sash that had gone slightly crooked. She pulled out a small notebook and started writing. Ambassador Rue of the Keth Dominion was standing near the wall. He was a large creature, broad across the chest, with a ridge of dark spines along his back that rose when he was tense. He noticed the human woman looking at him. He noticed that she was writing things down. She was not looking at him the way the other species looked at each other. Carefully, politely, trying not to stare. She was looking at him the way something looks at something it is very, very interested in. He filed a formal complaint 2 hours later. It stated that a member of the human delegation had observed his physical form in the manner of a biological assessor and that he found this deeply irregular for a neutral party. Seal read the complaint and quietly set it aside. The welcome reception was held in the Great Hall of Accord, a beautiful room with a domed ceiling painted to look like the sky of a dozen different worlds at once. Long tables ran along the walls, covered in food and drink from every species present. Most of it was decorative. A lot of it was sacred. Some of it was mildly poisonous to beings other than the species that brought it. Nobody had told the humans which was which. The delegation moved through the room with polite interest. nodding at the other delegates, trying small bows when they seemed right, smiling carefully with closed mouths, after Vasquez had quietly noticed that full smiles were making some people uncomfortable. Then they found the food. Engineer Tomas Ruiz picked up a bright orange item from a Sorvathi ceremonial plate. It was the size of a grape, smelled like citrus, and had been placed there as a symbolic offering to the Sorvathi's three-harvest ancestors. He ate it in one bite. And the Sorvathi delegate standing nearby made a sound like a very small explosion and had to be guided out of the room by two attendants. Corporal Dana Hecht, not knowing this, picked up a second one out of curiosity. She chewed slowly. "It's spicy," she told Ruiz. "I like it." Ruiz nodded and ate another one. Vasquez, from across the room, noticed the Sorvathi drama happening and made her way over to steer her engineers away from the ceremonial table. She did this calmly, smoothly, yet with a wide smile and a firm hand on each of their shoulders. Nobody noticed the smooth authority in how she moved them. Nobody except Rue, who watched from across the room and made another mental note. The fire petals were the worst. They were long red flowers placed in tall vases as decorations from the Luvari species, whose homeworld was full of plants that produced heat as a defense mechanism. Touching one left a mild burn. Eating one was considered deeply unwise. Hecht leaned in, sniffed one, and said, "These smell amazing." She ate half of one. She blinked. Her eyes watered slightly. She finished the other half. The Luvari delegate, who had been watching with growing horror, turned to his aide and said in a very quiet voice, "It ate the fire petal." "Yes," said the aide. "The whole thing." "Half of two, actually." A long silence. "What are these creatures?" the Luvari delegate asked. His aide had no answer. Later, near the end of the reception, a heavy ceremonial urn toppled from a shelf on the far side of the room. It was old and made of dense stone, a gift from the Accord's founding species, displayed in every summit since the beginning. It weighed as much as a large piece of machinery. Corporal Hecht was standing below it when it fell. She reached up and caught it with both hands. The impact barely moved her. She looked at it for a moment, then turned and set it back on the shelf, making sure it was balanced properly. And then she went back to her drink. 3 different species filed reports that night about what they had seen. One report described it as a display of physical capability inconsistent with species classification. One report simply said, "The human caught the stone urn." The third one was only 2 words long. "They're strong." Vial pulled Seal aside behind a wide pillar near the door. "How are the Keth reacting?" he asked. Seal checked his datapad. He scrolled through 12 new entries. "Ambassador Rue has requested a private security briefing," he said. "He wants to know if the humans were brought here as a deterrent." Vial stared across the room at the human delegation. They were laughing at something. One of the engineers was showing the others a photo on a small device. They looked relaxed and happy, and completely unaware of anything they had done. "We invited them to hold the flowers," Vial said softly. Seal said nothing. He just kept typing. And the first round of formal talks was scheduled for the following morning. Between arrival and the opening session, both delegations were given free time to settle in, rest, and prepare. The station had several quiet areas, reading rooms, observation decks, a long corridor that looked out at the stars, and a zero-gravity recreation deck near the top ring of Saranath Prime. Most species used the rest period to meditate, review documents, or sit in their chambers and drink warm things quietly. The humans used it to keep moving. Sergeant Marcus Okoye woke up at 5 in the morning by his internal body clock, which was a habit he had carried for 20 years and had no plans to break. He dressed, drank 2 cups of coffee from the small supply the delegation had brought aboard, and walked out into the corridor. His 3 soldiers were already waiting. Corporal Hecht was stretching in the hall. The other 2, Privates Wren and Bautista, were lacing up their boots. "Training," Okoye said simply. They nodded. The corridor outside the human quarters was wide and empty at that hour. Okoye and his team found a section of open space near a set of large support columns and got to work. Push-ups first, then pull-ups, using the thick metal pipes that ran along the upper wall. Pipes that were there for structural support and had never been used as exercise equipment before, and which held the weight just fine. To the later surprise of 3 different station engineers. Then Okoye and Hecht began sparring. It was not aggressive sparring. It was the slow, controlled kind, working through moves, practicing blocks and counters, keeping their breathing steady. To anyone who understood what they were doing, it looked like 2 people carefully rehearsing a set of practiced movements. But to the group of Keth observers who turned the corner at that precise moment, it looked like something else entirely. And the Keth had their own fighting traditions. They were formal, highly ceremonial, and almost always performed in dedicated combat chambers with specific clothing and witnessed by an official arbiter. A Keth warrior did not practice violence in a public corridor, without ceremony before breakfast, in full armor, without even breaking a sweat. The group of 4 Keth observers stopped at the corridor entrance. One of them took a half-step backward. None of them said anything. Okoye and Hecht kept going. They hadn't noticed the audience. Wren and Bautista, resting against the wall, gave the Keth observers a small nod. Just a polite acknowledgement, the kind a soldier gives when someone walks past. The Keth observers did not nod back. They turned around very slowly and walked back the way they had come. 15 minutes later, one of them sent a report to Ambassador Rue, and the report said, "The human soldiers rehearsed combat in an open corridor before the first meal of the day. They appeared to do this out of habit. No order was given. They acted as one unit without being told to. This is consistent with a predator species that maintains constant combat readiness." Rue read the report twice. Then he sat very still and looked at the wall for a while. Dr. Priya Nair was exploring. She had a map of the station on her tablet, but she was not very good at reading it. And she was moving quickly because there was so much to see. The architecture alone was fascinating. Different sections of the station had been built by different species over hundreds of years, and you could see the changes in the walls and ceilings as you moved from one section to the next. She turned left when she should have turned right, then right when she should have turned left. She went up 2 levels by accident, then down 3. She passed a room full of plants that glowed softly, and a corridor where the gravity was slightly different and her steps felt strange, and a sealed door covered in symbols she didn't recognize. Then she pushed open a plain door at the end of a quiet hall, expecting a storage room or a maintenance corridor. What she found was a large, dark chamber. It smelled like something sweet and old, like incense and warm stone. The floor was covered in a deep blue fabric. 12 Sorvati delegates were seated in a circle in the center of the room. Perfectly still, their eyes completely closed. The room was lit by a single low candle at the center of the circle. Every surface was draped in cloth. It was a private meditation ritual, sacred, silent, performed twice a year at the opening of major Accord events. Nair had walked right into the middle of it. She realized this about 1 second after she stepped inside. She yelped. It was not a loud yelp, but in a room that had been completely silent for 40 minutes, it was like a thunderclap. Every Sorvathi in the circle opened their eyes at once, 12 pairs of pale gold eyes, all looking at her in the near darkness. Nair stumbled backward. "I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I didn't—" She hit the wall with her shoulder. Her hand shot out to catch herself and pressed flat against the wall panel. All the lights in the room went out. Complete darkness. Not dim, not low. Total blackness. The silence that followed was so deep that Nair could hear her own heartbeat. But then she found the door, pushed it open, and scrambled out into the corridor. She stood in the hall for a moment, breathing hard, then walked back to the human quarters at a pace that was almost but not quite running. The Sorvathi high priest, Elder Vas, gathered his people after the door closed. They sat in darkness for a long moment. Then Vas spoke, in the slow, careful voice he used for sacred announcements. "A shadow being entered our circle," he said. It called out in an unknown tongue. It extinguished the light, and then it vanished. Nobody argued with this interpretation. The event was recorded in the Sorvathi spiritual log that evening. The description was brief, but formal. At the third bell of the opening recess, a being of unknown origin entered the sacred space, spoke a word of power, and removed the light from the room. Its nature is unclear. Its purpose is unknown. It is being watched. Nair spent the rest of the morning writing a very long apology in her notebook that she never actually delivered because she was too embarrassed. Engineer Tomas Ruiz had been awake since the ship docked. He was the kind of person who could not be in a building without noticing everything that was wrong with it. He had already identified a loose panel near the airlock, a ventilation duct that was making a frequency slightly outside normal range. While walking through a maintenance corridor that he had technically been allowed to enter because nobody had locked the door, a coolant leak behind a wall panel in Section 7. He looked at it for about 30 seconds. Then he took the small toolkit he always kept on his belt, opened the panel, and fixed it. It took him 14 minutes. He used a patch clamp, adjusted the pressure fitting, and sealed the line. Then he put the panel back, tightened the bolts, and walked on. The 3 Accord station engineers discovered the repair 2 hours later while doing routine checks. They stood and stared at it for a long time. The repair was clean, fast, and effective. It was also done with tools they had never seen before, in a style they did not recognize by someone who had no access, no authorization, and no reason to be in that corridor. They filed a joint report. On the key line read, "Unknown personnel accessed maintenance section without clearance and performed a structural repair of high quality. The method used is unfamiliar. The individual has not been identified. They left no identification. They simply fixed it and left." A Keth engineering officer reviewed the report as part of routine intelligence gathering. He passed it to his superior with one short note attached: "Unsettling in its efficiency." The afternoon was quieter, mostly. Director Vasquez, finding the soft, curved alien chairs deeply uncomfortable for her human spine, dragged a heavy steel equipment crate from the human quarters into the small side room where she was reviewing documents. The crate served perfectly as a seat. She sat on it and worked through her briefing papers without a second thought. The long, scraping sound of metal on polished floor traveled through 3 corridors. Every alien who heard it stopped what they were doing. Nobody went to check what it was. And they simply waited until it stopped and then slowly went back to what they were doing. The station's head of security made a note: "Unknown metallic dragging sound, Section 4, duration 11 seconds. No visible damage, cause unconfirmed." Later, near the end of the afternoon, a small maintenance drone in the corridor outside the human quarters began sparking. Its motor had seized. It spun in one place, clicking and flashing, going nowhere. Corporal Hecht walked past it. I looked at it for a moment and kicked it once. A firm, precise kick to the lower casing. The drone stopped sparking. It hummed back to life, corrected its path, and continued down the corridor as if nothing had happened. Hecht went back inside without a word. An Accord maintenance technician watching from down the corridor stood completely still for a long moment. Then he backed away, turned the corner, and took the long route back to his workstation. He did not write a report. And he simply sat at his desk for a while, thinking. That evening, the Keth delegation held an emergency closed session in their private chambers. The doors were sealed. The communication lines were encrypted. Ambassador Ru stood at the head of the table. He looked at each of his advisors in turn. He had read every report from the day: the sparring soldiers, the shadow being in the meditation room, the unauthorized repair, the scraping metal, the drone, the fire petal, the urn. He spoke quietly, the way he always did when something had genuinely surprised him. "They are not observers," he said. "They were not brought here to watch. They were brought here to send us a message. The Accord placed them in this station to show us, without ever saying it out loud, what patience looks like in a species that does not need to threaten you to make you feel threatened." He paused and looked at the table. "They eat things that should hurt them. They fix things they were never asked to fix. They train for combat like it is morning routine. They move through sacred spaces without fear because they do not recognize the sacred space as something to fear." He paused again. "They are not doing any of this on purpose." One of his advisors said carefully, "That might be the most frightening part." Ru nodded. "Tomorrow the talks begin," he said. "Stay calm. Do not show anything." He looked at the window, at the stars outside. And do not make sudden movements near the soldiers." The Grand Chamber of Accord was the most important room on Saranath Prime. It had been designed by 6 different architects from 6 different species, and it showed. The ceiling was tall and curved like the inside of a shell. The floor was dark stone, polished smooth. The main table was a wide oval, large enough to seat 40 delegates comfortably, and it sat under a ring of lights that glowed soft gold. The observers' gallery was a raised section along the back wall, separated from the main floor by a low railing. It had 10 chairs. They were cushioned. They had a clear view of everything. The humans arrived early and took their seats. Vasquez sat in the middle. Her aide Chen sat to her left with a tablet. Sergeant Okoye sat to her right in his full body armor, helmet clipped to his belt, hands resting on his knees, completely still. His 3 soldiers were seated behind him in a line. Doctor. Nair had her notebook open but kept it low on her lap so it was less obvious. Ruiz and the other engineer, a tall, quiet woman named Park, sat at the end of the row. Ruiz had already noticed a hairline crack in the wall panel near the ventilation unit and was thinking about it. Seal looked up at the gallery from the floor. He saw 12 humans sitting in a row, looking back at him. He looked away first. The talks began with ceremony. There were opening statements, formal acknowledgments, a reading of the Accord's founding principles in 3 languages, and then a ceremonial exchange of small carved objects between Vale and Ru that took 11 minutes and involved very specific hand positions. The humans watched all of this politely. Then the actual negotiations started, and they immediately went wrong. The issue was a stretch of space along the border of 2 systems, the Velen Corridor. The Keth said it belonged to them under an old survey claim, and the Accord said it fell within their established trade jurisdiction. Both sides had documents. Both sides had maps. Both sides had long, carefully constructed arguments delivered in the precise, formal language of galactic diplomacy, a language built over centuries to be polite, layered, and almost impossible to disagree with directly. They talked for 2 hours. They went in circles. Every time Vale's side said one thing, Nehru's side said another thing that meant almost the same thing but from a different angle. They were circling the same point the way 2 ships orbit the same moon without ever landing on it. Vasquez sat in the gallery and listened. She followed as much as she could through Chen's quiet translation. Her expression was neutral, but her fingers were tapping slowly on her knee. About 2 hours in, she leaned toward Chen and spoke in a low voice. "They're both saying the same thing," she said. The Accord wants guaranteed access to the corridor. The Keth want recognized prior claim. Those are not actually different conditions. They could both have what they want if someone just said it plainly. She said this quietly. She said it carefully. She was not speaking to the chamber, but her microphone was on. The sound system in the grand chamber of Accord was extremely good. It was designed to capture every word from every part of the room so that nothing was ever missed. And the translation units embedded in the table picked up her voice clearly, processed it in 0.4 seconds, and broadcast it in 17 different languages to every delegate in the room. The chamber went completely silent. Viel froze. His skin went white. Rue, across the table, had gone very still. His compound eyes moved slowly from the documents in front of him to the gallery at the back of the room. Everyone was looking at Vasquez. Vasquez looked up from Chen's tablet. She saw everyone looking at her. She looked at the microphone on the railing in front of her. The small green light on it was glowing steadily. She closed her eyes for exactly 1 second. Then she opened them. Viel began to rise from his seat. I apologize on behalf of Ambassador Rue. Rue spoke the words slowly. Not loud, not sharp, just deliberate. He was not speaking to Viel. He was speaking across the room up to the gallery. He was speaking to Vasquez. The human observer, he said. Explain what you meant. Another silence. Longer this time. Viel sat back down very carefully. Vasquez straightened in her chair. She looked at Rue. Then she looked at Viel. Then she took a breath and said in plain language exactly what she meant. She explained it in 4 sentences. No diplomatic phrasing, no layered meaning, just the direct point, that both sides wanted the same practical outcome, just described in different ways. That the Accord's claim of jurisdiction did not have to cancel the Keth's claim of origin, and vice versa. That the 2 conditions could exist at the same time, written into the same clause, and both sides could walk away saying they got what they came for. She stopped talking. Nobody moved. Then Viel turned slowly to his documentation officer and said something in Thalori. The officer typed quickly. A new clause appeared on the shared drafting screen above the table. Rue read it. Then he read it again. He turned to his own advisors and spoke quietly. They murmured back. Then he turned to face the table again and gave a single, slow nod. Seal wrote in his datapad with slightly trembling hands. Deadlock broken at hour 2 by human observer speaking without permission. All parties proceeding to next item. Do not add details. The talks moved forward through the afternoon, slowly, carefully, but forward. Several more points were agreed to. And one minor dispute over signal relay stations took 40 minutes, but was resolved. Then came the hardest part. The Keth Dominion, as the final condition of signing, required what their tradition called the Varath, the oath of non-aggression. It was not just a written promise. In Keth culture, the Varath had to be witnessed by a neutral party. The neutral witness would stand, say nothing, and by their silence and presence, confirm that the oath was real and binding. Ambassador Viel leaned across to his protocol officer, and they held a short, urgent, whispered conversation. Then Viel turned to the gallery. Director Vasquez, he said carefully, we have a request. Under Keth tradition, the signing oath must have a neutral witness. As your delegation is the only truly neutral party present, he paused. We ask that one member of your team sit in the formal witness position during the reading of the oath. They must remain silent, completely silent. They must not move, speak, or react in any way. Can you do this? Vasquez looked at her team. She looked at Okoye. Okoye had been sitting completely still for 3 hours and 40 minutes. He had not shifted in his seat. He had not adjusted his armor. He had barely blinked. Sergeant, she said quietly. Ma'am, he said. Can you sit very still and not make any noise for about 10 minutes? Okoye looked at her with the expression of a man who had once sat motionless in a sandstorm for 6 hours because it was Tuesday. Yes, ma'am, he said. He was moved to the formal witness chair, a tall, high-backed seat at the side of the chamber, facing both delegations. He sat down, placed his hands on his knees, and became the stillest thing in the room. Even his breathing was almost invisible. Then the Keth reading of the Varath began. It was long. It was formal. It was read in the old Keth language, which had a lot of long, low sounds that hummed in the chest. Every delegate in the room had their eyes on Rue as he spoke. It went on for 7 minutes. Then, in the deep silence between two lines of the oath, in the most solemn moment of the most important diplomatic event in 30 years, Sergeant Marcus Okoye sneezed. It was not a small sneeze. Humans do not do small sneezes. And it came out like a thunderclap in a library, sudden, massive, echoing off the curved ceiling and stone floor and bouncing back twice. Every head in the chamber turned. Okoye sat back upright. His face returned to its normal expression immediately, calm, flat, unreadable. He blinked once. That was all. For 3 full seconds, nobody breathed. Then the Keth interpreter, a small, fast-moving creature who had been following every word of the ceremony, leaned urgently toward Ambassador Rue. And the interpreter had done extensive research on human communication before the summit. He had, unfortunately, used a Keth military intelligence file from 4 years ago that contained several significant errors about human communication methods. The file had described a specific human vocalization, a sudden, explosive sound, as a traditional battle oath acknowledgement used by human soldiers to confirm personal witness. The interpreter whispered to Rue, "The human soldier has spoken the Kethvara, the personal witness sound. He has invoked his body as living confirmation of the oath." Rue looked at Okoye. Okoye looked back at him. His face said absolutely nothing. Rue was quiet for a long moment. Then something shifted in the ridge of spines along his back. A subtle change, but a real one. Something that, in a Keth, meant being moved. He turned back to the documents. "I accept the witness," he said formally. Now we proceed to signing. Seal deleted an entire paragraph from the official record. Then he deleted the paragraph about deleting the paragraph. Then he looked at Okoye, who was sitting straight and still as a statue, and thought several things that he chose not to write down at all. The peace agreement was signed 40 minutes later. Hands were pressed to documents. Seals were applied. Every delegate in the room rose and bowed, each in their own way, at their own angle, in their own tradition. And the peace was real. Vielle looked at the ceiling for a long moment, like a man asking a question to the universe and not expecting an answer. Then he straightened his robes, clasped his hands together, and walked to the reception that had been prepared. The humans followed behind him, talking quietly among themselves. Vasquez fell into step beside Okoye as they left the chamber. She kept her voice very low. "Sergeant," she said, Did you just sneeze the galaxy into peace?" Okoye looked straight ahead. "I had dust in my nose, ma'am." She nodded slowly. "Good. Don't explain that to anyone, ever." "Understood, ma'am." They walked into the reception hall together. The stars were bright in the long windows. Somewhere in the room, Ruiz had already found a tray of food and was eating something with quiet enthusiasm. Everything, impossibly, had gone fine. The delegations left Saranath Prime one by one over the following 2 days. Ships uncoupled from the docking rings and moved out into open space, carrying signed agreements, diplomatic records, and, quietly, in every private channel and encrypted datapad and personal journal on board, the reports. Every species that had been at the summit sent something home: official documents, intelligence summaries, personal letters, cultural analysis, spiritual observations. They went by tight beam transmission across hundreds of light years, landing in council chambers and government offices and temple archives and military briefing rooms on a dozen different worlds. None of the humans knew what was in them. The Thalori Diplomatic Corps filed their official report 6 days after the summit ended. It was long, detailed, and written in the careful formal language that Thalori diplomats had been trained to use for centuries. Ambassador Vael reviewed every page before it was sent. On page 47, under the section titled Neutral Observer Assessment, there was a new classification that the Corps had never used before. It had been created specifically for this report because no existing category fit. It read, Human Species, reclassified to Tier 3 Unpredictable. To Tier 3. Unpredictable was a classification previously used for only two things: a type of large energy-feeding creature found near the core of dying stars, and an old rogue AI system that had been decommissioned 80 years ago because nobody could predict what it would do next. The notes below the classification read, Humans appear to be simultaneously the most socially at ease and the most physically capable organisms currently assessed by this Corps. And they show no awareness of the effect they have on surrounding species. They do not attempt to intimidate. They are not performing their capabilities. This is simply how they are. This makes accurate behavioral prediction extremely difficult. Recommend further study before any close proximity diplomatic engagement. Vael had written the last line himself. He had stared at it for a while before deciding to leave it in. Seal, who proofread the document before it was sent, read that line 3 times. And then he thought about Corporal Hecht catching the stone urn. He thought about Okoye sitting motionless for nearly 4 hours. He thought about Ruiz fixing the coolant pipe without being asked or thanked or noticed. He kept the line in. The Keth Dominion's intelligence report was not meant to be seen by anyone outside their own government. It was marked with 4 levels of classification and sent through an encrypted military channel that the Accord had been trying to crack for 12 years. And they cracked it on the way home. An Accord signals officer picked it up, ran it through 2 translation filters, and brought it to Vael personally, not sure whether it was important. It was important. The report, written by Ambassador Rue's chief intelligence advisor, described the human delegation in full detail. Every observed behavior had been catalogued. Every incident had been analyzed. The conclusions were written in the flat, a serious language of a military intelligence assessment. No emotion, no color, just facts and what the facts meant. It described Director Vasquez as a command-level coordinator operating under the cover of a diplomatic title. It described Dr. Nair as a biological assessment specialist gathering field data on all species present. It described Ruiz and Park as technical operatives capable of accessing and modifying station infrastructure without authorization or detection. That it described the 4 soldiers as a compact, high-readiness combat unit that maintains active physical preparation at all hours. The final paragraph of the report read, The human delegation was presented to us as neutral observers, primitive, harmless, and uncomplicated. This assessment is incorrect. The humans were a carefully selected team of specialists covering every domain relevant to the mission: diplomacy, intelligence, engineering, and military. They operated seamlessly without visible command structure. They neutralized a security threat, maintained environmental dominance, and influenced the outcome of the negotiations, all while appearing to simply be present. We do not know if this was intentional. We suspect it was not. That is the most unsettling conclusion of this assessment. The final line, and added in a different hand from the rest of the document, possibly Rue's own, read, Under no circumstances should the Dominion pursue armed conflict with humanity. Not now. Not in 10 years. Possibly not ever. Vael read the report twice. Then he set it down and sat quietly for a long time. He thought about the invitation he had written 3 weeks ago. A primitive but well-meaning species, unlikely to complicate proceedings. He thought about how certain he had been of that, and he looked out the window at the stars. Seal, he called. Seal appeared at the door. Sir? Update the human species file. To what classification, sir? Vael thought for a moment. Start a new one, he said. On the Sorvathi homeworld, a large rocky planet with 3 moons and a very old civilization, the spiritual council met in their highest temple to receive the report from Elder Vas. Vas was not a dramatic person. He spoke slowly and with great care. And he had been a spiritual leader for 40 years and had never once added anything to the sacred records that he was not completely certain of. He stood before the council and told them about the meditation chamber, the figure in the doorway, the unknown sound, the darkness. He told them that the being had vanished without a trace, leaving no mark, no footprint, no evidence that it had ever been there at all, except for the memory of those present. The council was quiet, and then the senior elder asked, "What was it?" "Unknown," said Voss. "It came without warning. It left without explanation. It spoke once, in a language we do not have in any archive, and then it took the light." Another long silence. "Is it a danger?" the senior elder asked. Voss considered the question seriously. "I do not believe so," he said finally. "But I believe it was simply passing through." The event was added to the Sorvathi Book of Witnessed Phenomena, a record kept for over 2,000 years of strange and sacred events. The entry was short. It described the being as a shadow traveler, a classification used for beings that moved between spaces without belonging to any of them. Dr. Priya Nair, xenobiologist, accidentally author of A Minor Religion, was at that moment sitting on a transport back to Earth, eating a sandwich and catching up on her scientific journals. She had no idea. In the engineering guilds of 2 separate species, the Accord's own Thalori Technical Division and an independent Keth engineering school, the coolant repair performed by Ruiz was being studied. Neither group knew who had done it. Neither group could identify the tools used. Both groups agreed that the technique was unfamiliar, efficient, and surprisingly elegant for something that appeared to have been done quickly and without any preparation. The Thalori Technical Journal published a short paper about it. The paper was titled Unregistered Repair of Station Coolant Line 7, a case study in unknown methodology. It concluded that whoever had performed the repair had an intuitive understanding of fluid pressure systems that was not consistent with any known training program. It recommended further investigation. The paper was listed as authored by unknown personnel, possibly autonomous. Ruiz, back on Earth by then, was in his garage working on his car. He had no idea he was a published subject in a galactic academic journal. He would have been pleased to know it. He probably would have printed it out and put it on his refrigerator. The debriefing happened on a Thursday morning. It was a gray government room in a gray government building. Long table, bad coffee, fluorescent lighting, and a row of senior officials from the United Earth Council seated on one side, serious-faced and well-prepared. Director Vasquez sat across from them. Her team was lined up beside her: Chen, Nair, Ruiz, Park, and the 4 soldiers. They were all cleaned up and wearing their best. Okoye had polished his boots. Vasquez delivered her report. She was methodical and honest. She went through each day, each event, each outcome. She mentioned the microphone incident without minimizing it. And she mentioned the fire pedals. She mentioned the urn. She mentioned the maintenance repair. She mentioned the meditation room, which made Nair look at the table. She described the formal witness request and Okoye's role. She did not mention the sneeze directly. She described it as an involuntary biological vocalization that, due to a translation misalignment in Keth interpretation documents, was received as a formal oath-witnessing gesture, which contributed to the successful conclusion of the signing ceremony. Okoye, beside her, stared straight ahead. She finished. The council officials were silent. Secretary General Adaeze Moro looked at her for a long moment. She was an older woman with a completely unreadable face that had served her well for 30 years in global politics. "So," she said, "we accidentally became the most feared species at a peace summit." "That appears to be the outside assessment, ma'am," said Vasquez. And the peace held. Yes, ma'am. Because one of our soldiers, she continued slowly, had allergies. A very long pause. Dust, said Okoye quietly. Not allergies, ma'am. There was dust. Morrow looked at him for one full second. Then she looked back at Vasquez. Send the Accord a thank-you gift, she said. Something tasteful. Nothing that could be interpreted as a threat. She paused. On second thought, have someone check it first. I make sure it can't be accidentally interpreted as a threat. She stood and quietly increased the defense budget. Nothing announced, just quietly. She picked up her folder and walked out. The room sat in silence for a moment. Then Ruiz leaned toward Park and whispered, Do you think they know about the journal paper? No, Park whispered back. Should we tell them? Park thought about it. Probably not, she said. Somewhere on the other side of the galaxy, and in the stone-carved Senate Hall of the Keth Dominion, a place where no human had ever stood, and where the walls were lined with the names of every war the Keth had ever fought, Ambassador Rue stood before the full assembly. It was a formal session. Every seat was filled. The light in the hall was low and amber, the way it always was for important speeches. Rue did not speak loudly. He never did. He spoke the way he always spoke. Quietly, clearly, and in the way that made people lean forward to listen. The humans did not come to that station to negotiate, he said. They were not there to make demands. They made no threats. They asked for nothing. They signed nothing. He paused. They simply came. And by coming, by being what they are without pretending to be anything else, they reminded every species in that room of something we had forgotten. He looked out across the assembly. They reminded us that peace is not the absence of strength. It is the choice that strength makes when it could choose otherwise. He let that sit in the air for a moment. The humans could have frightened us on purpose. They did not. They were friendly. They were curious. They ate our food and fixed our pipes and sat in our chairs and sneezed in our ceremonies. A very slight pause. And still, without trying, they were the most quietly formidable presence in the room. He folded his hands. And I do not think they knew they were doing it. They were simply being themselves. He looked at the floor for a moment, then back up. That is the most frightening part, and it is also, I think, the most hopeful part. The assembly was silent. Outside the Senate Hall windows, the stars were the same as they always were, cold and bright and very far away. And somewhere in that direction, on a small blue planet around an average yellow star, 12 humans were home, going about their lives. I mostly unaware that they had changed anything at all. Director Vasquez was writing a report that nobody would fully believe. Dr. Nair was writing a paper that would quietly become famous in 3 academic fields. Engineer Ruiz was in his garage, thinking about that coolant fitting, wondering if there was a better way to do it. And Sergeant Marcus Okoye was sitting in a park near his house in the late afternoon sun, doing nothing at all, perfectly still. And because it was a nice day and he had nowhere to be. He was not thinking about the summit. He was not thinking about the peace treaty. He was not thinking about the speech being given at that exact moment in a Senate hall 40 light years away. He sneezed once, quietly, and reached into his jacket pocket for a tissue. Then he sat back, closed his eyes, and listened to the wind.